The whispers began the moment Miss Beatrice Hollowell entered the Pemberton ballroom, as they always did. At 40 years of age, she had long since accepted her role as the object of society's cruel amusement. The spinster who had somehow failed to secure even the most desperate of matches, the woman who had become a cautionary tale whispered behind fans. "Poor dear Beatrice," came the familiar murmur from a cluster of matrons near the refreshment table. Still attending these events at her age. How optimistic of her. One would think she'd have the dignity to retire to the countryside by now, added another voice, dripping with false sympathy. 40 years old and still hoping for a proposal. It's rather pathetic, don't you think? Beatrice maintained her serene expression, the mask she had perfected over 2 decades of social humiliation. She moved through the glittering crowd with quiet grace, her dove-grey silk gown modest but elegant, her dark hair, now touched with silver at the temples, arranged in a simple but becoming style. She had learned long ago that drawing attention to herself only invited more cruelty. "Miss Hollowell," the Countess approached with that particular smile that promised nothing good. "How lovely to see you here tonight. Still hopeful, I see." "Good evening, Lady Pemberton," Beatrice replied with perfect composure, though her heart clenched at the barely concealed mockery. "Thank you for the invitation. Your ballroom looks magnificent." "Indeed, though I must say I'm surprised to see you here. Most ladies of your circumstances prefer quieter entertainments, but then you always were rather unique in your choices." The words stung, as they were meant to. Beatrice had heard variations of this conversation countless times, the polite suggestions that she should accept her fate, retreat from society, embrace her role as the pitiable spinster aunt. She had been on the shelf for so long that she had become a fixture, like an old piece of furniture that no one quite knew what to do with. "If you'll excuse me," Beatrice said quietly, "I think I'll take some air on the terrace." She escaped through the French doors, grateful for the cool night air and the blessed silence. The terrace overlooked the Pemberton Gardens, moonlight casting silver shadows across the manicured lawns. Here, away from the whispers and pitying glances, she could finally drop her careful composure. Beatrice closed her eyes and allowed herself a moment of honest pain. 40 years old, and still the subject of society's cruel entertainment. She had long since given up hope of marriage, of love, of the family she had once dreamed of, but attending these events had become a matter of pride. She refused to let them drive her into complete exile. "The view is quite spectacular from here, isn't it?" Beatrice's eyes flew open at the sound of a deep, cultured voice. She turned to find a man standing at the far end of the terrace, partially hidden in shadow. Even in the dim light, she could see he was tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in evening attire that spoke of wealth and position. "I beg your pardon," she said, suddenly conscious of her solitude with a stranger. "I didn't realize anyone else was here." "Please, don't let me disturb your peace," the gentleman said, stepping into the moonlight. "I was seeking the same escape from the festivities that you were, I suspect." Beatrice's breath caught as the light revealed his features. This was no ordinary gentleman. This was Duke Adrian Kingsworth, the most eligible bachelor in all of England. At 32, he was devastatingly handsome, with dark hair that caught the moonlight, piercing blue eyes, and the kind of aristocratic bearing that made lesser men seem like shadows in his presence. "Your Grace," she said, dropping into a curtsy that she hoped concealed her shock. "I should return inside. I didn't mean to intrude upon your solitude." "Miss," he prompted gently. "Hollowell. Miss Beatrice Hollowell." Ah, something flickered in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, though not the kind she was accustomed to. "You're the lady who wrote the essay on agricultural reform that was published in the Edinburgh Review." Beatrice stared at him in amazement. She had indeed published that essay, under her own name despite the scandal it had caused. Most of society had either ignored it entirely or used it as further evidence of her unwomanly eccentricity. You read it?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. "I did indeed. It was brilliant. One of the most insightful analyses of crop rotation and soil management I've encountered. Your proposals for tenant welfare were particularly innovative." Beatrice felt heat rise in her cheeks. When had anyone last complimented her intelligence rather than pitying her circumstances? "Thank you, Your Grace, though I fear most of society found it rather inappropriate for a lady to express such opinions publicly." "Then most of society is composed of fools," Duke Adrian said, with such conviction that Beatrice felt something flutter in her chest. something she had thought long dead. Intelligence should be celebrated, not condemned, especially intelligence as sharp as yours. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the ball drifting out from the ballroom. Beatrice found herself studying the Duke's profile, noting the strong line of his jaw, the way the moonlight caught in his dark hair. He was everything she was not. Young, beautiful, sought after by every ambitious mother in London. "May I ask you something, Miss Hollowell?" he said suddenly. "Of course. Why do you attend these events? Forgive my directness, but you seem ill at ease among the company inside." Beatrice considered lying, offering some polite deflection, but something in his manner encouraged honesty. "Because I refuse to let them win," she said simply. "They would prefer I disappear entirely, retire to some cottage in the countryside, and spare them the embarrassment of my continued existence. But I won't give them that satisfaction." Duke Adrian turned to look at her fully, his blue eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You speak as though you're at war." "Aren't I?" Beatrice asked with a bitter smile. "A 40-year-old spinster who dares to show her face in polite society, who writes essays and expresses opinions, who refuses to accept that her life is over simply because she never married. Yes, Your Grace, I am very much at war." "Then you're a warrior," he said softly, "and a brave one." The words hit Beatrice like a physical blow. When had anyone called her brave? When had anyone seen her continued presence in society as courage rather than desperation? "I should return inside," she said, suddenly overwhelmed by the conversation, by his presence, by the impossible kindness in his voice. "Thank you for the conversation, Your Grace." "The pleasure was entirely mine, Miss Hollowell," he replied, bowing formally. "I do hope we'll have occasion to speak again." As Beatrice made her way back through the ballroom, she felt as though she were walking in a dream. The Duke of Kingsworth, the most eligible man in England, had not only spoken to her with respect, but had actually read and appreciated her work. It was more than she had dared hope for in years. But as she caught sight of the cluster of young beauties surrounding the refreshment table, all of them no doubt hoping to catch the Duke's attention when he returned inside, reality crashed back down upon her. Whatever kindness he had shown her on the terrace was simply that, kindness. A moment of polite conversation with a pitiful spinster before he returned to the serious business of choosing a bride from among the season's diamonds. The whispers followed her as she made her way toward the exit. But for once, Beatrice barely heard them. Her mind was full of piercing blue eyes and words that had made her feel for just a moment like she was something more than society's joke. The most eligible bachelor. 3 days after the Pemberton Ball, all of London society was buzzing with speculation about Duke Adrian Kingsworth's matrimonial intentions. At 32, he had successfully evaded the marriage trap for over a decade, but the pressure was mounting. His mother, the Dowager Duchess, had made her expectations clear, and every ambitious family in the ton had set their sights on him as the ultimate prize. "He must marry soon," declared the Marchioness at her weekly salon. "The succession depends upon it, and he certainly had ample opportunity to choose from the finest young ladies of the past several seasons." "Lady Charlotte Pemberton is the obvious choice," suggested another guest. "Beautiful, accomplished, and her dowry is substantial. They would make a magnificent couple." "Or perhaps Miss Arabella Fairfax," countered a third voice. "She's barely 18, fresh from the schoolroom, and absolutely stunning." The Duke seemed quite taken with her at the Ashworth musicale. Duke Adrian himself was notably absent from these discussions, having retreated to his study in Kingsworth House to escape the constant parade of hopeful mothers and their daughters. He sat behind his massive oak desk, attempting to focus on correspondence from his estate managers, but his thoughts kept drifting to a pair of intelligent grey eyes and a conversation that had challenged every assumption he held about society and its expectations. Miss Beatrice Hollowell was unlike any woman he had ever encountered. While the young beauties of the ton simpered and flattered, speaking only of fashion and gossip, she had engaged him in genuine intellectual discourse. Her essay on agricultural reform had demonstrated a mind of remarkable depth and insight, yet she was dismissed by society as a figure of ridicule simply because she remained unmarried at 40. The injustice of it rankled him more than he cared to admit. "Your Grace?" His secretary entered with the morning's invitations. "The Duchess of Marlborough has requested your presence at her garden party tomorrow afternoon. She's particularly eager for you to meet her niece, who has just arrived from Bath." "Another introduction to another eligible young lady, I presume?" Adrian asked dryly. I believe that was the implication, Your Grace. Adrian set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. Tell me something honestly. Do you think I'm a fool for not having married by now? The secretary, a man of middle years who had served the family for decades, considered the question carefully. I think, Your Grace, that you're a man who values substance over superficiality. Perhaps you simply haven't found a lady who matches your intellectual requirements. And what if such a lady exists but is considered unsuitable by society's standards? Then society's standards are flawed, Your Grace. Adrian smiled at the diplomatic response. Indeed they are. Send my regrets to the Duchess. I have other plans tomorrow afternoon. What those plans were, Adrian wasn't entirely certain, but he knew they didn't involve another tedious introduction to another vapid young beauty who would giggle and blush and offer nothing of substance to the conversation. Instead, he found himself thinking about Miss Hollowell's essay, about the passion and intelligence that had shone through every carefully crafted argument. He had heard she was something of a recluse, rarely venturing into society except for the occasional ball or musicale, but perhaps there were other venues where a lady of her intellectual interests might be found. The Royal Institution, for instance, was hosting a lecture on agricultural innovations that very afternoon. The lecture. The Royal Institution's lecture hall was sparsely populated, filled mostly with gentleman farmers, progressive landowners, and a handful of scholars. It was not the sort of venue that attracted fashionable society, which made it all the more surprising when Duke Adrian spotted a familiar figure seated in the back row, her attention completely absorbed by the speaker's discussion of soil composition and crop yields. Miss Beatrice Hollowell sat with perfect posture, her grey wool dress practical rather than fashionable, a small notebook in her lap where she occasionally jotted down notes. She was, Adrian realized, probably the only woman in attendance, yet she seemed completely at ease in the academic environment. He made his way quietly to the seat beside her, noting the moment she became aware of his presence. Her grey eyes widened in surprise, but she quickly composed herself and offered a polite nod of acknowledgement. "Your Grace," she whispered, "I didn't expect to see you here." "Nor I you," he replied softly. "Though I should have realized that the author of such an insightful essay would be interested in the latest developments in agricultural science." A faint blush colored her cheeks at the compliment, and Adrian found himself fascinated by the way it transformed her features. She was not beautiful in the conventional sense. Her face was too angular, her features too strong for current fashion. But there was something compelling about her, an intelligence and depth that made the simpering beauties of the ton seem like pale shadows in comparison. When the lecture concluded, they walked out together into the afternoon sunlight, continuing their discussion of the speaker's theories on nitrogen fixation and soil improvement. "I found his conclusions about legume rotation particularly interesting," Beatrice said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Though I think he underestimated the importance of proper drainage in clay soils." "You speak from experience?" Adrian asked. "My father left me a small estate in Hertfordshire," she explained. "Nothing grand, but it provides me with independence and the opportunity to implement some of these newer agricultural methods. My tenants were skeptical at first, but the improved yields have made believers of them." Adrian stared at her in amazement. "You manage your own estate? Why shouldn't I?" Beatrice asked, a note of defensiveness creeping into her voice. "I'm perfectly capable of understanding crop rotations and tenant agreements. Just because I'm an unmarried woman doesn't mean I'm helpless." "I didn't mean to suggest you were," Adrian said quickly. "Quite the opposite, I'm impressed. Most ladies of my acquaintance couldn't tell you the difference between wheat and barley, let alone implement complex agricultural reforms. Most ladies of your acquaintance are probably 20 years younger than I am, and have been raised to believe that appearing helpless is attractive to gentlemen," Beatrice replied with a bitter smile. "I passed the age where such pretenses serve any purpose long ago." They had reached the street where their carriages waited, but neither seemed eager to end the conversation. Adrian found himself reluctant to return to his empty townhouse and the stack of invitations from hopeful mothers. "Miss Hollowell," he said impulsively, "would you do me the honor of taking tea with me? I find myself eager to continue our discussion, and I suspect my cook would appreciate having someone to serve other than myself." Beatrice hesitated, clearly torn between desire and propriety. "Your Grace, it wouldn't be appropriate. An unmarried lady taking tea alone with a gentleman. Then we'll leave the drawing-room doors open and ensure my housekeeper is present," Adrian said. "Please, Miss Hollowell, I can't remember the last time I had such an intellectually stimulating conversation." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because she nodded slowly. "Very well, Your Grace. but only for a short while. Kingsworth House was a testament to generations of wealth and taste, its elegant rooms filled with priceless art and furnishings. But Adrian led her not to the formal drawing room, but to his private study, a more intimate space lined with books and comfortable chairs. "I hope you don't mind the informality," he said, as his housekeeper brought in the tea service. "But I thought you might appreciate seeing my collection of agricultural texts. I have several first editions that might interest you." For the next 2 hours, they discussed everything from crop rotation to tenant welfare, from the latest scientific discoveries to the social reforms that both believed were desperately needed. Beatrice's knowledge was extensive, her opinions well-informed and passionately expressed. She challenged his assumptions, offered new perspectives, and made him think about familiar subjects in entirely new ways. "You're remarkable," he said finally, as the afternoon light began to fade. "Absolutely remarkable." Beatrice set down her teacup with hands that trembled slightly. "Your Grace, please don't what? Speak the truth? Miss Hollowell, in all my years in society, I have never met a woman with your intelligence, your passion, your depth of understanding. You put every diamond of the ton to shame." "I'm 40 years old," Beatrice said quietly, her voice thick with pain. "I'm a spinster, a figure of ridicule, a cautionary tale. I'm not someone a man like you should be saying such things to." "A man like me?" Adrian leaned forward in his chair. "What kind of man am I, Miss Hollowell? Young, handsome, wealthy, titled? You could have any woman in England. Why would you waste your time with someone like me?" "Because," Adrian said softly, "you're the first woman I've met who makes me want to be a better man. Because when I'm with you, I feel truly alive for the first time in years. Because you see the world not as it is, but as it could be, and you have the courage to work toward that vision." Beatrice stared at him, her grey eyes wide with disbelief. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," Adrian replied. "I'm saying that I find you fascinating, intelligent, and utterly captivating. I'm saying that I would rather spend an afternoon discussing agricultural reform with you than attend a dozen balls filled with empty-headed beauties." "Your Grace." Beatrice rose from her chair, clearly agitated. "This is impossible. You must see that. Even if you meant what you're saying, which I can hardly believe, society would never accept it. A duke and a 40-year-old spinster. It would be the scandal of the century." "Let them talk," Adrian said, rising as well. "What do I care for their opinions?" "You should care," Beatrice said firmly. "You have responsibilities, duties, expectations to fulfill. You need an heir, a young wife who can give you children. You can't throw all of that away for whatever this is." "And what if I don't want children? What if I want something more than duty and obligation? What if I want a partner, an equal, someone who challenges me and inspires me?" Beatrice shook her head, backing toward the door. "You're not thinking clearly. This is madness. I should go." "Beatrice," Adrian said, using her given name for the first time. "Please don't run from this. Don't run from me." But she was already at the door, her face pale with emotion. "Thank you for the tea, Your Grace, and for the conversation. But this cannot happen again." She fled before he could stop her, leaving Adrian alone in his study with the lingering scent of lavender and the devastating realization that he was falling in love with the most unsuitable woman in all of England. The scandal begins. Word of the Duke's visit to the Royal Institution spread through London society like wildfire, though the details became increasingly distorted with each telling. By the time the story reached the drawing rooms of Mayfair, it had transformed from an innocent shared interest in agricultural science to a clandestine assignation of the most scandalous nature. "I heard he spent the entire afternoon with her," whispered Lady Pemberton to her circle of friends, "alone in his study with the doors closed. The impropriety of it." "But surely you're mistaken," protested another lady. "The Duke would never, that is, with Miss Hollowell. She's 40 if she's a day, and hardly the sort of woman to attract a man of his caliber. Nevertheless, my dear, I have it on excellent authority. My footman's cousin works at Kingsworth House, and he swears the Duke entertained her for hours. Tea was served, and they were heard laughing together like old friends. The speculation grew more vicious with each repetition, and by the time it reached Beatrice's ears, the innocent afternoon had been transformed into something sordid and shameful. "Miss Hollowell," her elderly housekeeper said with obvious distress, "there are people saying terrible things about you and His Grace. Surely it's not true. You wouldn't—" "That is, you're far too sensible to involve yourself in such a scandal." Beatrice felt her heart sink as she realized the magnitude of what had happened. In her naivety, she had thought their intellectual connection could exist in a vacuum, separate from society's cruel judgments. But she should have known better. A woman of her age and status could not be seen in the company of an eligible duke without inviting the worst possible interpretations. It was perfectly innocent, she assured her housekeeper. We discussed agricultural methods, nothing more, but I fear the damage is already done. Indeed it was. Within days, Beatrice found herself completely ostracized from the few social circles that had previously tolerated her presence. Invitations that had once arrived regularly ceased entirely. Former acquaintances crossed the street to avoid speaking to her. The whispers that had always followed her became openly hostile. The audacity of that woman, she heard one matron declare at the lending library, to think she could ensnare the Duke with her pathetic wiles. At her age, it's positively shameful. Someone should warn His Grace, replied her companion. These desperate spinsters will stop at nothing once they catch the scent of a title. Mark my words, she'll be claiming he compromised her next. Beatrice fled the library in humiliation, her cheeks burning with shame. This was worse than anything she had endured before. Previously, she had been merely pitied or ignored. Now she was actively reviled, painted as a predatory fortune hunter who had somehow entrapped the innocent Duke. Meanwhile, Adrian was facing his own social consequences. His mother, the Dowager Duchess, had summoned him for what proved to be the most uncomfortable conversation of his life. "Adrian," she said, her voice icy with disapproval, "I have been hearing the most disturbing rumors about your recent associations. If you're referring to my friendship with Miss Hollowell, then yes, I imagine you have," Adrian replied calmly. "London society does so enjoy its gossip." "Friendship?" The Dowager's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "Is that what you call entertaining a 40-year-old spinster in your private study? Adrian, what were you thinking?" "I was thinking that I had met an intelligent, accomplished woman whose company I enjoyed," Adrian said firmly. "Miss Hollowell is a published author, a successful estate manager, and one of the most insightful people I've ever encountered. I fail to see why her age or marital status should preclude our friendship." "Because," his mother said with exaggerated patience, "you are the Duke of Kingsworth. Your every action is scrutinized, your every association analyzed for its potential impact on the family name. You cannot simply befriend whomever you please without considering the consequences. And what consequences are those exactly? The Ton is already whispering that you've lost your mind, that this woman has somehow bewitched you with her desperate schemes. They're saying she's a fortune hunter, a pathetic creature who has deluded herself into thinking she could capture a duke." Adrian's jaw tightened with anger. "Miss Hollowell is nothing of the sort. She has her own estate, her own income. She neither needs nor wants my fortune." "Then what does she want, Adrian? Because I assure you, no woman of her age associates with a man of your position without some ulterior motive." "Perhaps," Adrian said quietly, "she simply enjoys intelligent conversation with someone who appreciates her mind, rather than dismissing her because of her circumstances." The Dowager studied her son's face with growing alarm. "Adrian, you cannot possibly be developing feelings for this woman. Tell me I'm wrong." Adrian met his mother's gaze steadily. "I find Miss Hollowell to be an extraordinary person. If that troubles you, I'm sorry, but I won't apologize for recognizing worth where others see only what they choose to see." "This is disastrous," the Dowager said, sinking into her chair. "Adrian, you must end this association immediately. The damage to your reputation, to the family name, it could be irreparable." "My reputation will survive," Adrian said firmly. "And if the family name is so fragile that it cannot withstand my friendship with a respectable woman, then perhaps it's not worth preserving." He left his mother's house with her protests ringing in his ears, but his resolve only strengthened. The Tun's reaction to his association with Beatrice had revealed the ugly truth about the society he had been born into, its superficiality, its cruelty, its complete inability to recognize true worth. But it had also shown him something else, how much Beatrice meant to him. The thought of her facing society's scorn alone, of her being painted as a desperate fortune hunter when she was anything but, filled him with a protective fury he had never experienced before. He was going to court Miss Beatrice Hollowell properly and openly, regardless of what society thought, and if that created a scandal, so be it. Some things were worth fighting for. The courtship. Adrian's campaign to win Beatrice's heart began with flowers. Not the elaborate arrangements typically sent to young debutantes, but carefully chosen bouquets that reflected her interests and personality. White roses for her purity of spirit, lavender for her grace under pressure, and herbs from his own garden that he knew she would appreciate for their practical as well as aesthetic value. Each bouquet came with a note written in his own hand, not the flowery poetry that was fashionable, but thoughtful observations about their shared interests or references to their conversations. He sent her a first edition of a treatise on soil management, with a note that read, "I thought you might appreciate the author's innovative approach to drainage systems. I would value your opinion on his theories." Beatrice tried to return the gifts, but Adrian persisted with the gentle determination of a man who had found something precious and had no intention of letting it go. When she refused to receive him at her modest townhouse, he began appearing at the places he knew she frequented: the lending library, the Royal Institution, the small bookshop near Bloomsbury, where she purchased her scientific journals. "Your Grace," she said one afternoon when she encountered him browsing the agricultural texts at Hatchard's bookshop, "this must stop. You're only making things worse for both of us." "How am I making things worse?" Adrian asked, genuinely puzzled. "I'm simply trying to spend time with a woman whose company I enjoy." "You know very well how," Beatrice replied, glancing around nervously at the other patrons who were watching their interaction with obvious fascination. "The gossip, the speculation. It's becoming unbearable." "Then let's give them something real to gossip about," Adrian said impulsively. "Marry me, Beatrice." The words hung in the air between them, shocking them both. Adrian hadn't planned to propose, not here, not like this. But the moment the words left his lips, he realized they felt absolutely right. Beatrice stared at him in horror. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," Adrian said, his voice low and urgent. "Marry me, Beatrice. Let me show the world what I see when I look at you. Not a spinster or a figure of ridicule, but an extraordinary woman who deserves to be cherished." "Adrian," Beatrice whispered, using his given name for the first time, "you don't understand what you're asking. I'm 40 years old. I can't give you children. I can't give you the young, beautiful wife that society expects. I would ruin you. You would save me," Adrian countered. "Beatrice, I've spent my entire adult life going through the motions of what was expected of me. I've attended balls and flirted with debutantes and played the role of the eligible bachelor, but I've never felt truly alive until I met you. You challenge me, inspire me, make me want to be better than I am. But the scandal will fade," Adrian said firmly, "but my feelings for you won't. Beatrice, I love you, not despite your age or your circumstances, but because of who you are, intelligent, passionate, brave, extraordinary. I love the way your eyes light up when you talk about something that interests you. I love your fierce independence, your refusal to let society define your worth. I love that you see possibilities where others see only problems." Beatrice felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "You don't know what you're saying. You're caught up in the novelty of it all, the excitement of defying expectations. But when the reality sets in, when you realize what you've given up, the only thing I would be giving up is a life of emptiness and pretense," Adrian said. "Beatrice, please, give us a chance. Give me a chance to prove that love is more important than society's expectations." "I need time," Beatrice whispered. "I need to think." "Take all the time you need," Adrian said gently. "But know this, I'm not going anywhere. I'll wait as long as it takes for you to believe that you deserve to be loved." The weeks that followed were a torment of indecision for Beatrice. Adrian's proposal had shaken her to her very core, forcing her to confront feelings and possibilities she had long since abandoned. Could she really believe that this extraordinary man loved her? Could she risk her heart on what might be nothing more than a temporary infatuation? The gossip had reached fever pitch. Every newspaper carried veiled references to the Duke's unsuitable attachment, and the betting books at White's were filled with wagers on whether he would actually go through with such a scandalous match. The ton was divided between those who thought him temporarily mad and those who believed he was being manipulated by a clever fortune hunter. "Miss Hollowell," her solicitor said during one of their regular meetings, "I feel I must advise you that your reputation has suffered considerably from these rumors. Perhaps it would be wise to consider retiring to your estate in Hertfordshire until the gossip dies down." "And let them drive me into exile?" Beatrice asked with a flash of her old spirit. "I think not." But privately she was beginning to waver. The constant whispers, the pointed snubs, the cruel laughter that followed her wherever she went. It was taking its toll. Perhaps it would be kinder to Adrian to simply disappear, to remove herself as a source of scandal and allow him to return to his proper place in society. It was her housekeeper who finally provided the clarity she needed. "Miss Beatrice," the elderly woman said one evening as they sat by the fire, "may I speak plainly?" "Of course. I've watched you for nigh on 20 years now, ever since you came to London as a young lady. I've seen you endure disappointment after disappointment, rejection after rejection, and through it all, you've maintained your dignity and your principles. You've never compromised who you are to please society." "What's your point?" Beatrice asked gently. "My point is that His Grace sees in you what I've always seen, a woman of rare worth and character. And if you turn him away now because you're afraid of what people will say, you'll be doing the very thing you've never done before. You'll be letting them win." The words hit Beatrice like a revelation. All her life she had refused to bow to society's expectations, had insisted on living according to her own principles rather than their narrow definitions of acceptable behavior. Why should she stop now, when the stakes were higher than they had ever been? The next morning she sent a note to Kingsworth House. "Your Grace, if your offer still stands, I would be honored to accept. B.H." Adrian's response came within the hour. "My darling Beatrice, my offer will stand until the end of time. May I call upon you this afternoon to discuss our future? Yours always, A." The decision. When Adrian arrived that afternoon, Beatrice was waiting for him in her small but elegant drawing room, dressed in her finest gown, a deep blue silk that brought out the silver in her hair and the intelligence in her grey eyes. "You're certain?" Adrian asked as soon as they were alone. "Because once we announce our engagement, there will be no going back. The scandal will only intensify." "I'm certain," Beatrice said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I've spent 20 years letting society dictate my choices, letting their opinions determine my actions. I won't do it anymore. If you truly want me, Adrian, then I'm yours." Adrian crossed the room in 3 quick strides and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and tenderness he had been holding back for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I love you so much it terrifies me." "I love you too," Beatrice replied, marveling at how natural the words felt. I never dared hope." "Hope, my darling," Adrian said, framing her face with his hands. "Hope for everything. We're going to be so happy together, Beatrice. I promise you that." As they sat together planning their future, Beatrice felt a peace she had never known before. Yes, there would be scandal. Yes, there would be those who would never accept their union. But for the first time in her life, she was choosing love over fear, happiness over propriety, and it felt absolutely right. The announcement of their engagement sent shockwaves through London society that reverberated for months. The newspapers were full of speculation, the drawing rooms buzzed with gossip, and the betting books at the gentlemen's clubs saw frenzied activity as wagers were placed on everything from the likelihood of the wedding actually taking place to how long the marriage would last. "It's absolutely scandalous," declared the Countess at her weekly salon. "A duke of his standing, marrying a woman old enough to be, well, certainly old enough to know better. What can he be thinking? Perhaps he's thinking with his heart rather than his head," suggested a younger voice, though it was quickly shouted down by the majority. "Hearts are all very well for novels," sniffed an elderly matron, "but dukes have responsibilities. He needs an heir, and she's far too old to provide one. Mark my words, he'll come to his senses before the wedding." But Adrian showed no signs of coming to his senses. If anything, the public announcement seemed to have liberated him from any remaining doubts. He was seen everywhere with Beatrice, at the opera, at gallery exhibitions, at scientific lectures that no fashionable couple would normally attend together. He seemed determined to show the world that his choice was deliberate and joyful. "You're glowing," he told Beatrice one evening as they walked through the gardens of his estate outside London, where they had retreated to escape the worst of the gossip. "I've never seen you look so beautiful." "I feel beautiful when I'm with you," Beatrice replied, marveling at the truth of the statement. "You make me see myself through different eyes." "I make you see yourself through honest eyes," Adrian corrected. "The eyes of someone who loves you exactly as you are." They had decided on a small private ceremony at Adrian's estate chapel, with only close family and friends in attendance. Beatrice had no family left, except for a distant cousin who had already made it clear that she disapproved of the match, so the guest list was mercifully short. The Dowager Duchess had initially threatened to boycott the wedding entirely, but Adrian's quiet determination had eventually worn down her resistance. She still didn't approve, but she loved her son enough to support his choice, however reluctantly. "I don't understand it," she confided to her closest friend the night before the wedding, "but I've never seen Adrian so happy. Perhaps there's something to be said for marrying for love rather than duty." The wedding. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, with early autumn sunshine streaming through the ancient windows of the chapel. Beatrice stood before her mirror, hardly recognizing the radiant woman who looked back at her. Her wedding gown was elegant, but not ostentatious. Ivory silk with delicate pearl embroidery, her grandmother's pearls at her throat, her silver-touched hair arranged in a style that was both sophisticated and romantic. "You look like a queen," her housekeeper said with tears in her eyes. "His Grace is the luckiest man in England." "I'm the lucky one," Beatrice replied softly. I never dared dream that I could be this happy." The chapel was small and intimate, filled with the scent of roses and the warm glow of candlelight. As Beatrice walked down the aisle, alone as she had chosen, a final assertion of her independence, she saw only Adrian waiting for her at the altar, his face transformed by a smile of such pure joy that it took her breath away. "Dearly beloved," the vicar began, but Beatrice barely heard the familiar words. She was lost in Adrian's blue eyes, in the wonder of this moment that she had never thought would come. When it came time for their vows, Adrian surprised everyone by setting aside the traditional words and speaking from his heart. "Beatrice," he said, his voice strong and clear, "you have taught me that true worth has nothing to do with age or society's expectations. You have shown me what it means to love someone not for what they can give you, but for who they are. I promise to cherish your brilliant mind, to support your dreams, to stand by your side against whatever challenges we may face. I promise to love you not despite our differences, but because of them. You are my equal, my partner, my greatest blessing." Beatrice's own vows were equally heartfelt. "Adrian, you saw value in me when I had almost given up seeing it in myself. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable, believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself. I promise to be your partner in all things, to challenge you when you need challenging, to support you when you need support. I promise to love you with all my heart, for all my days, and to never let society's opinions diminish what we have built together." When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Adrian's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of all the love and happiness that lay ahead. As they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, the small congregation rose in genuine celebration of a love that had triumphed over every obstacle. The wedding breakfast was held in the great hall of Adrian's estate, a magnificent room filled with flowers and laughter and the warmth of true friendship. Even the Dowager Duchess seemed to have caught some of the joy, toasting the couple with genuine warmth. "To Adrian and Beatrice," she said, raising her glass, "who have taught us all that love knows no boundaries, recognizes no limitations, and conquers all obstacles. May your marriage be blessed with all the happiness you both deserve." As the evening wore on and their guests began to depart, Adrian and Beatrice found themselves alone on the terrace overlooking the gardens, the same spot where Adrian had first told her he loved her. "Happy?" he asked, pulling her close against his side. "Deliriously," Beatrice replied, leaning into his warmth, "though I still can't quite believe this is real." "Believe it," Adrian said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You're my wife, my Duchess, my heart's desire, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt your worth again. And I intend to spend the rest of mine making sure you never regret choosing love over duty," Beatrice replied. "Impossible," Adrian said with a smile, "because loving you isn't a choice, it's a necessity. You're not just my wife, Beatrice, you're my salvation." The transformation. 6 months into their marriage, the Duke and Duchess of Kingsworth had become one of the most talked-about couples in England, though the nature of the conversation had gradually shifted from scandal to admiration. Their unconventional love story had captured the imagination of the public, and their obvious happiness together had begun to change minds, even among the most conservative members of society. "I must admit," confessed the Marchioness at her salon, "I was quite wrong about the Duke's choice. Have you seen them together? The way he looks at her, the way she lights up when he enters a room. It's quite extraordinary. And she's done wonders for his estates," added another guest. "I heard she's implemented revolutionary agricultural methods that have increased yields by 30%. The tenants positively worship her. Indeed, Beatrice had thrown herself into her new role with characteristic passion and intelligence. She had transformed the management of Adrian's vast holdings, implementing the progressive farming techniques she had long advocated. More than that, she had established schools for the tenant children, improved housing conditions, and created a system of healthcare that was being studied and copied by other progressive landowners. "You're remarkable," Adrian told her one evening as they reviewed the latest reports from their estate managers. "In 6 months, you've accomplished more than most duchesses manage in a lifetime." "I have advantages most duchesses don't," Beatrice replied, looking up from the ledgers spread across her desk. "I'm not 20 years old and focused on fashion and parties. I have experience, knowledge, and the freedom that comes from not caring what society thinks of my unconventional methods." "Society is beginning to think quite highly of your methods," Adrian said, settling into the chair beside her desk. "And of you. Did you see the editorial in the Times praising your agricultural reforms?" Beatrice smiled, an expression of quiet satisfaction crossing her features. "I saw it, though I suspect they're more willing to praise me now that I'm a duchess than they were when I was simply Miss Hollowell." "Their loss," Adrian said firmly, "though I confess I'm grateful they were too blind to see your worth. If some other man had recognized your brilliance and married you years ago, I never would have had the chance to fall in love with you." "Flatterer," Beatrice said, but her eyes were warm with affection. "Though I must say, I'm rather glad things worked out as they did. I don't think I was ready for this kind of happiness when I was younger. I needed to become fully myself first." It was true. The years of struggle, of social ostracism, of learning to value herself despite society's dismissal, had forged Beatrice into a woman of remarkable strength and self-possession. She approached her role as Duchess with the same fierce intelligence and determination that had made her a successful estate manager, but now she had the resources and position to implement her ideas on a much larger scale. "Your Grace," her secretary announced, entering the study with the afternoon's correspondence, "you have several invitations that require your attention. The Royal Agricultural Society wishes you to speak at their annual conference. The Ladies' Education Committee requests your patronage, and the Prime Minister's wife has invited you to a dinner party next week." Beatrice looked up in surprise. "The Prime Minister's wife?" "Indeed, Your Grace. It seems your reputation for progressive thinking has reached the highest levels of government. There's talk that they may wish to consult you on some proposed agricultural legislation." After the secretary left, Adrian shook his head in amazement. "6 months ago you were a social pariah. Now you're being courted by the government for your expertise. It's extraordinary." "It's justice," Beatrice corrected. "My ideas haven't changed. My knowledge hasn't increased dramatically. The only thing that's different is my title and my association with you. It's rather depressing, actually, to realize how much society values rank over merit." "Then we'll use that rank to promote merit," Adrian said decisively. "We'll make sure that other brilliant women have the opportunities you were denied for so long." This had become one of their shared passions, using their position and influence to challenge society's narrow definitions of women's capabilities. Beatrice had quietly begun funding scholarships for young women to study subjects traditionally reserved for men, while Adrian used his position in the House of Lords to advocate for educational reforms. "Speaking of which," Beatrice said, pulling out another letter from the stack, "I've received a most interesting proposal from a young woman in Yorkshire. She wishes to establish an agricultural college specifically for women. She's asking for our support." "What do you think?" Adrian asked. "I think it's brilliant," Beatrice replied without hesitation. "And I think we should not only support it, but help her expand the concept. Imagine a network of institutions where women could study agriculture, estate management, even engineering and medicine. The ton would be scandalized," Adrian observed with amusement. "Good," Beatrice said firmly. "It's time they were scandalized by something worthwhile. The legacy." As their first anniversary approached, Adrian and Beatrice had settled into a rhythm of life that combined deep personal happiness with meaningful public service. Their marriage had become a model for other unconventional couples, proof that love could indeed triumph over social expectations. "I have something to tell you," Beatrice said one evening as they sat in their private sitting room, the fire crackling warmly in the grate. There was something in her tone that made Adrian look up from his book with immediate attention. "What is it?" he asked, noting the mixture of excitement and nervousness in her expression. Adrian, I'm with child." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and wonderful. Adrian stared at his wife, his mind struggling to process what she had just told him. "But you're 41, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, well, apparently my body didn't receive the memo about being too old for such things," Beatrice replied with a shaky laugh. "The physician confirms it. He says I'm about 2 months along, and while there are risks given my age, he sees no reason why I shouldn't carry the child to term successfully." Adrian was across the room in an instant, pulling her into his arms with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. "Beatrice, my darling, how do you feel about this?" "Terrified," she admitted honestly. "Thrilled. Overwhelmed. I never thought I had accepted that children weren't part of my future. But now we're going to be parents," Adrian said, his voice thick with emotion. "Beatrice, this is miraculous. The ton will have a field day," Beatrice said with a wry smile. "A 41-year-old first-time mother. They'll say it's scandalous, unnatural, probably dangerous." "Let them say what they will," Adrian replied fiercely. "This child will be born into a family that values intelligence over beauty, character over conformity, love over social expectations. He or she will be the luckiest child in England." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, despite the dire predictions of some of society's more conservative members. Beatrice continued her work with the agricultural reforms and women's education initiatives, though she did make some concessions to her condition as the months progressed. "You're glowing," Adrian told her one afternoon as she worked in the garden, directing the planting of a new experimental crop. At 7 months pregnant, she was undeniably radiant, her face soft with contentment and anticipation. "I feel wonderful," she replied, one hand resting on her rounded belly. "Strong, healthy, ready for whatever comes next." "I love you," Adrian said suddenly, the words torn from somewhere deep in his heart. "I love you so much, Beatrice. You've given me everything, love, purpose, hope, and now this incredible gift of a child. I don't know what I did to deserve such happiness." "You saw worth where others saw only failure," Beatrice replied softly. "You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. You gave me the courage to believe in myself again. If anyone deserves happiness, Adrian, it's you." Their daughter was born on a snowy February morning, arriving with the determined spirit that would characterize her throughout her life. Lady Catherine Beatrice Kingsworth was perfect, healthy, strong, and possessed of her mother's intelligent grey eyes and her father's determined chin. "She's beautiful," Adrian whispered, cradling his daughter with the reverence of a man who had never dared hope for such a blessing. "Absolutely perfect. She's going to change the world," Beatrice said with quiet conviction, watching her husband fall completely in love with their child. "I can see it in her eyes already, that spark of intelligence, that refusal to accept limitations. Just like her mother," Adrian said, leaning down to kiss Beatrice's forehead. "Thank you, my darling. Thank you for this incredible gift." 5 years later, the Duchess of Kingsworth's annual garden party had become one of the most anticipated events of the London season, though not for the reasons that typically made such gatherings fashionable. Rather than the usual display of wealth and status, Beatrice's parties celebrated achievement and innovation, bringing together the most brilliant minds of the age, regardless of their social standing. "Mama, look!" 5-year-old Catherine came running across the lawn, her dark curls flying behind her as she clutched a butterfly net in one hand and a collection jar in the other. "I caught 3 different species of butterfly, and Professor Williams says one of them is quite rare." Beatrice smiled, watching her daughter with a mixture of pride and amusement. Catherine had inherited both parents' intellectual curiosity and her mother's determination to pursue her interests, regardless of whether they were considered appropriate for a young lady. "That's wonderful, darling," Beatrice said, kneeling down to examine the carefully preserved specimens. "What did you learn about their wing patterns?" As Catherine launched into an enthusiastic explanation of butterfly anatomy, Adrian approached with their newest addition, 2-year-old James, who was currently fascinated by the mechanical workings of the garden fountain. "Our children are going to scandalize society," he observed with obvious delight, watching as James attempted to dismantle the fountain's pump mechanism. "And I love that we're proving every day that the best love stories are the ones that begin with, 'They said it was impossible,'" Beatrice replied, her eyes sparkling with the same intelligence and passion that had first captured his heart. As the afternoon wore on, their garden party continued to challenge every convention of polite society. Lady Catherine could be found deep in conversation with a renowned botanist about plant classification, while young James had successfully convinced a mechanical engineer to explain the principles of steam power. Other children of the ton played traditional games, but the Kingsworth children were learning, exploring, questioning everything around them. "Your Grace," approached the Minister of Education, a man who had initially been skeptical of Beatrice's radical ideas about women's education, "I wanted to personally thank you for your work with the Yorkshire Agricultural College for Women. The first graduating class has exceeded all expectations. 3 of the young ladies have already been hired to manage estates, and 2 others are pursuing advanced studies in botanical science." "That's wonderful news," Beatrice replied, though her tone suggested this was exactly what she had expected. "Intelligence and capability aren't limited by gender, Minister. We simply needed to provide the opportunities for these young women to prove it." "Indeed. In fact, the Prime Minister has asked me to discuss with you the possibility of expanding the program. There's talk of establishing similar institutions in Scotland and Ireland." Adrian watched this exchange with the same wonder he felt every day when observing his wife's impact on the world around them. The woman who had once been dismissed as a pathetic spinster was now consulted by government ministers, sought after by progressive thinkers, and respected by the most brilliant minds of their generation. "Papa," Catherine tugged at his sleeve, "Professor Williams says that butterflies can see colors that humans can't see. Do you think that's why they're so beautiful? Because they can see beauty that we can't." "I think," Adrian said, lifting his daughter into his arms, "that beauty often exists in ways we don't expect, and it takes special eyes to see it properly. Like how you saw beauty in Mama when everyone else was too silly to notice?" Catherine asked, with the directness that characterized all her observations. "Exactly like that," Adrian confirmed, catching Beatrice's eye across the garden and sharing a smile that held years of love and understanding. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the house, where a carriage had just arrived bearing a familiar coat of arms. The Dowager Duchess emerged, followed by a young woman Adrian didn't recognize. "Grandmother." Catherine wiggled out of her father's arms and ran to embrace the older woman, who had become one of her granddaughter's most devoted supporters, despite her initial reservations about the match. "My dear child," the Dowager said warmly, "you look as though you've been conducting scientific experiments in the garden again." "I have. I've been studying butterfly wing patterns and soil composition and the way water moves through different types of rock. Mama says that understanding how things work is more important than looking pretty." "Your mama is quite right," the Dowager replied, though 5 years ago such a statement would have horrified her. "Now, I have someone I'd like you to meet. This is Miss Eleanor Hartwell. She's just arrived from Bath, where she's been studying mathematics and natural philosophy." The young woman stepped forward, and Adrian immediately recognized the familiar look of intelligence and determination that seemed to characterize all the remarkable women who found their way into their circle. She was perhaps 25, with auburn hair and green eyes that sparkled with curiosity. "Your Grace," Miss Hartwell said, curtsying to Beatrice, "I cannot tell you what an honor this is. Your work with women's education has been an inspiration to me. I've been following the progress of the Yorkshire College with great interest. Miss Hartwell has developed some fascinating theories about the application of mathematical principles to agricultural planning," the Dowager explained. "I thought you might find her work intriguing." Within minutes, Beatrice and Miss Hartwell were deep in conversation about crop rotation algorithms and statistical analysis of soil productivity. Adrian watched with amusement as another brilliant mind was drawn into his wife's ever-expanding circle of progressive thinkers. "She's remarkable, isn't she?" the Dowager said quietly, joining Adrian as they observed the animated discussion. "I mean Beatrice, of course. I was so wrong about her, Adrian, so terribly, foolishly wrong." "You weren't wrong to be concerned," Adrian replied diplomatically. "You were protecting what you thought was best for me." "No, I was protecting what I thought was proper for you," the Dowager corrected. "There's a difference. Beatrice has shown me that propriety and happiness are not the same thing, and that sometimes the most improper choice is the most right one." "She's taught us all that lesson," Adrian agreed. "Every day she shows me something new about what's possible when you refuse to accept limitations." As if summoned by their conversation, Beatrice approached with Miss Hartwell in tow, her face bright with excitement. "Adrian, you must hear Miss Hartwell's theories about mathematical modeling for crop yields. She's developed a system that could revolutionize agricultural planning across England." "I'd be delighted to hear about it," Adrian said, though he was more interested in watching his wife's enthusiasm than in the mathematical theories themselves. After 5 years of marriage, he still found himself captivated by her passion for learning and innovation. "Perhaps," Miss Hartwell said hesitantly, "I could present my findings at one of your salons, Your Grace. I understand you host regular gatherings for intellectual discussion." "Of course. In fact, next week we're hosting a symposium on agricultural innovation. Your research would be perfect for the program." As the afternoon continued, Adrian found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. 5 years ago, he had been a duke going through the motions of his expected role, surrounded by people who valued his title more than his thoughts. Beatrice had been a woman dismissed by society as a failure, her intelligence and capabilities ignored because they didn't fit conventional expectations. Now they were partners in every sense of the word, in love, in parenting, in their shared mission to challenge society's limitations and create opportunities for others who didn't fit the traditional molds. Their home had become a haven for brilliant minds, regardless of gender, age, or social standing. Their children were growing up in an environment where curiosity was encouraged, questions were welcomed, and the phrase, "that's not how things are done," was treated as a challenge rather than a prohibition. "Papa," James appeared at his side, his small hands covered in dirt and his eyes bright with discovery. "I found worms in the garden and they're making the soil better. Mama says they're nature's farmers." "That's right," Adrian said, lifting his younger son into his arms. "Sometimes the most important work is done by the creatures everyone else overlooks." "Like Mama?" James asked, with the innocent wisdom of childhood. "Exactly like Mama," Adrian confirmed, feeling his heart swell with love and pride. As the sun began to set over their estate, casting golden light across the gardens where their guests continued their animated discussions, Adrian felt a profound sense of gratitude for the path that had led them here. Their love story had begun with society's mockery and skepticism, but it had evolved into something far more significant than a simple romance. They had created a legacy, not just in their children, but in the minds they had influenced, the opportunities they had created, and the barriers they had broken down. Every young woman who now studied subjects previously denied to her, every brilliant mind that was valued for its capabilities, rather than dismissed for its circumstances, every child who grew up believing that intelligence and character mattered more than conformity. All of these were part of the continuing story that had begun with a 40-year-old spinster and a duke who had the wisdom to see each true worth. "What are you thinking about?" Beatrice asked, slipping her hand into his as they watched their guests beginning to gather their belongings and prepare for departure. "I'm thinking about how grateful I am that society was too blind to appreciate you until I came along," Adrian replied. "And I'm thinking about how much I'm looking forward to the next chapter of our story." Beatrice murmured, leaning against his side. "I have a feeling it's going to be quite an adventure, especially with 3 children to raise and a 4th on the way." 3 children to raise who will undoubtedly challenge every convention society holds dear," Adrian corrected with obvious delight. "I can hardly wait to see what they accomplish." As their guests departed, calling out thanks and promises to attend the next symposium, the Kingsworth family gathered on their terrace to watch the sunset. Catherine was already planning her next scientific experiment. James was examining a mechanical toy with intense concentration, and Beatrice was glowing with the contentment of a woman who had found not just love, but purpose and fulfillment beyond her wildest dreams. "Do you ever miss it?" Adrian asked quietly. "The simplicity of your old life, before all this responsibility and attention?" Beatrice considered the question seriously before answering. "I miss the quiet sometimes," she admitted, "but I don't miss the loneliness, the feeling that my mind was going to waste, the sense that I was living only half a life. This," she gestured to encompass their children, their home, their work, their love. "This is what I was meant for. I just had to wait 40 years to find it." "And I had to wait 32 years to find you," Adrian replied. "But it was worth every moment of waiting." As they stood together watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, surrounded by the laughter of their children and the promise of tomorrow's adventures, both knew that their story was far from over. They had proven that love could triumph over society's expectations, that intelligence and character were more valuable than youth and beauty, and that the most extraordinary lives often began with the most unlikely circumstances. The woman who had been mocked for being unmarried at 40 had indeed found love with the most sought-after duke in England. But more than that, she had found herself, her voice, her power, to change the world. And together, they were raising a new generation who would continue that work, challenging limitations and expanding possibilities for everyone who dared to dream beyond society's narrow definitions of worth and success. Their love story had become a revolution, one heart and one mind at a time. "Good," Beatrice replied firmly. "Society needs scandalizing, and our children are going to be the ones to do it. Catherine with her scientific pursuits, James with his mechanical genius, and whoever else might join our family in the future." "Whoever else?" Adrian raised an eyebrow with interest. "Well," Beatrice said with a smile that was both mysterious and mischievous, "I am only 46. And apparently, my body has decided that age is merely a number." Adrian stared at her in amazement, then swept her into his arms, spinning her around the garden while their guests applauded, and their children laughed with delight. "I love you," he said, as he set her down, his voice thick with emotion. "I love our unconventional family, our scandalous happiness, our refusal to accept society's limitations. Did this beautiful tale of unexpected love and second chances capture your heart? If Beatrice and Adrian's journey from scandal to salvation moved you, please like this story and subscribe for more enchanting historical romances. Share this with someone who believes that love knows no age limits and that true worth lies in the soul, not society's expectations. Which moment touched you most, their first intellectual connection, Adrian's brave proposal, or their triumph over society's cruelty? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to hit the notification bell for more romantic adventures where love conquers all prejudices and proves that the heart recognizes no boundaries.